All right, and good evening, people from all over the world, artists, listeners to Splinebomb. My name is Henk Kok, I'm your host for today, and we are here with the 8th episode, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you my good friend and old coach, Ankush Jain. Ankush Jain is a full-time life coach. He specializes in state of mind. He's been into this for just 3 years, and he's been doing really well with it. He's fully running with it recently. He just quit his job, and he's doing very well at the moment. And he just basically loves to transform people's lives for the better. And I would say he's very good at his job. You might have remembered from episode 3 we had Gerd Kramer, who coaches Olympic athletes in state of mind. And I briefly mentioned Ankush in that conversation. And Gerd Kramer obviously remembers him because he was there when Ankush was trained in this in the beginning, and told the people around him to keep their eye out for this guy, and he's rightfully so, doing very well. So that's great. But how do I know this guy? I met Ankush through the internet, and we connected deeply, and I wasn't really sure why, but I hired him, and once I did, I knew why, because it was very, very helpful for me, and to the point that whatever I learned from Ankush, I'm now making a podcast about, because it's so helpful to me. And he's, over the time, become a really good friend. We worked together on creating another podcast called the Relationship Series, which specializes in state of mind and relationship. And so it's a great pleasure to finally have some space for him to talk about creativity, business, money, deadlines, and just having fun with it all. So welcome, Ankush.
Thanks, Henk, for having me on board. It's a real pleasure to be on the podcast, and thank you so much for that introduction. I know you're someone who was one of my very first clients, and I love kind of seeing what you're creating in the world and what you're doing with this podcast and really impacting people. And now having clients of your own, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and really privileged and grateful to be on this podcast today.
All right, great. So that being said, we have the opportunity to talk state of mind, and we've had a few practitioners on the podcast, but each and every time that we do, I'm very pleased because we can go deeper. And so we discussed a little bit in the pre-call about what we could dig up for the listeners that would really help them have an easier life and do better. And one of the areas that I found pretty fascinating, but this is going to be a pretty free-form discussion, so whatever comes up, comes up. I would say most artists would be very, very at ease with creativity. But they might not realize the fact that creativity is also applicable to everything else in their life. And the fascinating thing that I find with Ankush is that he lived in the corporate world for a while, and now he's come to the principles, he sees quite a bit more about how we're all really creative, and how that doesn't just apply to the arts. It applies to business as well, it applies to coaching, and on some level it applies to everything basically. So I'm just going to give Ankush as much of the floor as possible to let him really run with it, and then we'll see where this goes. Is there anything that comes up for you as I'm talking about that?
Yeah, no, I love that you said that, Henk, and I mean, a bit of my background was, in some ways, I used to feel like I wasn't a creative person at all, right? Like, if you talk about the arts, if you talk about drawing, I'd convinced myself that I was no good at that. So when I was at school and it came to art class, I'd give it a go, but I'd kind of got this image of myself as no good at that, and therefore I was no good at art. And as I've grown older, I've kind of seen that creativity and being an artist isn't necessarily being able to draw well or paint or make sculptures or things like that. And over the years, especially in the last few years when I've discovered more about state of mind, I've started to see my inner artist come out. and my inner creativity flow a lot more. And it's flown in different areas. So it's flown in my business. It's flown in the way I approach clients and get very creative in how I work with my clients. It's come out in relationships. It's come out in just every aspect of my life. Creativity has come out. And I know we were talking earlier today when we were discussing this episode, how before I really wanted to start my own business many years ago. I kind of thought in my head that was what I wanted to do. And I really struggled. And I kind of sat there and then thought about it, and I thought, well, I need money, and I need a really good idea, and I need this and this and this and this. And I just didn't really come up with anything. Or if I came up with an idea, I found reasons why I couldn't do it. And funnily enough, recently, as I've kind of got rid of a lot of mental blocks, if you like, things keep flowing a lot more. And I have ideas all the time. Oh, that would be a good business. Oh, that's a good way to make money. And it's amazing that those opportunities were available before. Or a lot of the time they were available before, but I just didn't see them. And so kind of almost every single day I see more and more how creativity is applicable in every single area of our lives. And it's just so much fun when we release that out and we let our innate creativity kind of flow in whatever area of our life we allow it to. And it's just such a completely different way to approach life, to approach creativity than I used to look at creativity or I used to view things.
As I'm listening to that, I love this, and from my side, I can add to that. Just like I was always a pretty creative person, but I never really thought about that you can apply that to everything else as well. I would just like consider, well, yeah, I can come up with ideas, and I can draw a little bit and do animation, and gotten pretty good at that over the time. But then I would run into a different venture. I would just run into business or a podcast or a relationship or someone's birthday, and that same creativity is applicable there as well. And I find that so fascinating because I can vividly imagine that a lot of artists are very, very, very good at coming up with ideas, and they're very self-sufficient, self-directing. They're able to learn. They know what they need to do to get better at their craft, which is what makes them so good, right? But that same sense of direction and creativity can be applied to anything else that you'd like to do. And so, for example, and this is one that I find fascinating, is that when someone runs into a deadline, for example, and you can say many things about that, but one of the first things is that you can get creative with that. And I had a discussion about deadlines with someone, and they after a while they just saw through it. They saw the nature of deadlines, and they realized that it wasn't as big as a deal, and that's just the first glimpse. That's just the first glimpse, and after that you can get way more creative with it. So yeah, that came up for me in that case. So in a way, what we're pointing to is that you can supercharge your creativity. You can take it further than what it is currently, and you can apply it to more spaces of your life. Is there maybe a more specific example where you previously didn't see opportunity, and then now you're looking in the direction of, you know what, it's so obvious. I only need to do this and this, for example.
I think that applies in so many areas of my life, and I want to come back a little bit to what you said around deadlines. Because what I may have heard from what you just said a few years ago is when someone's talking about creativity around deadlines, that means how can you move the deadline? Or how can you do half the work in the deadline to give yourself more time? That's what I would have interpreted from what you're saying. And my view on it is very, very different now around deadlines. And my view is that deadlines can actually help us to be more creative. It can be a kind of a point in the sand, a line in the sand to say, okay, let's see how creative I can be between now and that point and what can come up. And I know for me, sometimes when I've had deadlines, when they've been at work or at university, or in any situation, sometimes that's the most creative I become, because I have to be. And I have so many ideas and creative ideas that if I don't give myself a deadline, quite often things just don't get done, and I don't get creative around it. So it's not necessarily just about working harder. I think it's about almost tapping into that unlimited potential that we have, or some people call it that flow state, where we just get immersed in it and right, okay, now I just need to do this, and something wonderful emerges from that. And I know you mentioned earlier on that we work on a podcast together called the Relationship Series. And I remember when we first started doing that, we would turn around one episode a week. Now, what was really interesting about that is because we knew we had to turn around one a week, at least for me, we turned it around. And, for various reasons, we're not doing so many episodes at the moment. We are still releasing them. But I find that it's almost to the point when we say, okay, we're going to get the next episode out on this day, that it gets done. Yeah. And guess what? We're creating something into the world. We're releasing, if you like, in a way, it's a form of art. It's something that we've produced from ourselves, from nothing. And that only gets done when we kind of impose these deadlines on ourselves, and we say, right, okay, we're going to get the next one out by this date, or we're going to do the next thing by this date. And so before, I would have seen deadlines as a block to creativity. There would have been things that stopped us being creative, that got in the way. And now I've almost taken a full kind of 180-degree shift, where I see them as being very, very, very helpful for bringing out creative solutions. And so now I almost kind of working for myself. I have no deadlines in a way. I've far fewer deadlines than I was working for someone else. And I actually impose deadlines on myself. And I impose structure on myself. And I know I was reading a book earlier this year which really helped me see this, which was actually the more creative I am, the more creative anyone is, the better that structure and deadlines can help us to really channel that creativity in an effective way. And for me, understanding how my mind works, understanding state of mind better, really helps that, because it gives me a choice. So before, I used to feel how I felt. I had no choice around that, or it felt like I had very little choice around it. Whereas now, when I understand how the mind works a lot better, and by that I mean I understand that my feeling state is just a reflection of thought. That's all it is. It's got nothing to do with the outside world. That gives me far more choice, because I can have a deadline and I can feel very upset about it. I can feel frustrated by it. I can feel stressed by it. But knowing that isn't caused by the deadline, but in fact is a reflection of thought in the moment, helps me kind of transcend that and go, okay, well, that's how I'm feeling right now. And I can still have fun with this. I can still do something with it. And on the flip side, what also helps is knowing that kind of feeling that I have, like, let's say, for example, it's a stressful feeling. Quite often, or I would say almost every time, it's unjustified. And I've created something that, terrible is going to happen if I don't meet that deadline, or something doesn't happen. And the truth is, we over-exaggerate things. And or certainly I did. I over-exaggerated things, so that if I didn't meet a deadline, then the world was going to end. Or when I was working a corporate job, I was going to get sacked. Well, no, I won't. More often than not, that won't happen. And so, knowing that that's not an issue, letting go of that, actually, ironically or kind of strangely, allowed me to meet my deadlines more often and get more done when I let go of the fact that something really bad was going to happen if I didn't meet them.
So what you're saying, I really love, and I would have loved to hear that years ago, because I've really recognized it, that you look at something comes up, right? Like life is pretty much logistics in that level. There's always something that needs to be done before a certain time where you like it wouldn't happen or it might not happen. And so you have a deadline, or you make a deadline as a but what I really like is that, as you're saying, oversize. It sounds almost like you're creatively using thought. It's like, oh, this is a big deal, and then with that thought comes a feeling of like, oh, this is important, and then with that feeling, you're like, oh man, this is a really big deal, because it sounds like you're gonna experience that, and then as you're experiencing it, it becomes more real. It becomes even bigger. It almost becomes like a cycle in a way. I think that's an area that can apply to pretty much anything, but especially around, well, whatever you make out of it. But this cycle is interesting because it's almost sounds like it's your own creation. It's your own. You made it.
Yeah, and one thing that is coming up for me is that I never really understood before how much creative potential I had. And I've touched on this, I think, earlier on in this conversation, but I really want to draw that out. One thing that we all know is that we use a tiny percentage of our brain. Like, everyone knows this. We're only using a small percentage of our brain, and this is all this brain capacity that we're not using at the moment. And I don't know if it's the same thing, but what I've realized is we have a huge amount of creative potential. We have a huge amount kind of almost locked up inside us, or that we can tap into. And I don't know anyone that really realizes that. I don't even realize it fully, but I'm seeing it more and more that I have no idea what I'm really capable of. And there's so many times that I remember back when I was in university and I was like, oh my God, I've got this exam. There's no way I'm going to be able to revise for all these exams and pass. Yeah. And I did.
Yeah.
And throughout my life, and it's not just me, I know so many people, we do things that we don't think are possible or look impossible to us, or that we can't achieve. And the truth is, we've got so much potential. We've got, some people might say, you've got your innate wisdom. Some people might not like those words. I like using the words potential. But we've got so much potential, and the thing that gets in the way is our thinking. We kind of cover up with layers and layers of thought that innate potential, that ability that we've got inside ourselves to kind of really draw out something that we'd never thought before, draw out some creative solution that seemed impossible to us kind of moments before it came to us. And so for me, when I see that more, or when I help my clients see that more, the world changes. It's not about techniques, it's not about doing, one thing that wasn't mentioned in the introduction is, before I came across the principles behind state of mind, I'd been learning, kind of personal development stuff, self-development stuff for about a decade. And I actually was ready to start coaching, and almost by accident fell into this kind of field around state of mind, and changed completely how I was going to coach people. And so I've been around a lot of different things, and they're all great and really, really, really helpful, and they helped me, which is why I wanted to share that with people. But what I find more powerful is, rather than giving artists or business people or whoever a technique or a good idea or a solution, which can be helpful in the moment, helping every single person tap into their own potential is far, far, far more valuable, because I know now clients come back to me and tell me their creative solutions to their problems that I had never even thought of, which are perfect for them. And so anyone listening to this, if they've got a creative challenge, if they've got a deadline, it's going to be different for every single person. There's not going to be two situations the same. You've got different bosses, you've got different clients, you've got different challenges, you've got different briefs, whatever it is. And over time, we are recording this right now. Technology is the way it is. The world is the way it is, and it's rapidly changing. And in 5 or 10 years' time, the world will look very different. The artistic challenges people may face may be very different. But there's something that's true, from 100 years ago, and it will be true in 100 years, which is that we have that unlimited potential. And if we tap into that more, all of this stuff that we're talking about, all of the challenges that artists face, all the challenges that anyone faces, anyone that wants to be more creative, they kind of come down. They become less challenging. And it's a lot more fun to kind of live in that world where we know we've got that power inside of us. And for me, I'm continually surprised, and I shouldn't be, about how that works. And I know that in my own life, so many times, and we were talking about a situation earlier on that I had with a client, only a week ago, where there looked like a complete impasse. And when I kind of realised, okay, there's always a solution, there's always something that can come out of this, and not get caught up into the detail of the problem. I came out with a creative solution that was even better than anything that could have come before. It was almost like the problem helped me to become more creative. I wouldn't have actually been that creative if it hadn't been for that issue, that challenge. So I really want people to hopefully get an understanding or get some eyes for this. We're just scratching the surface on this. I know you've done a series of podcasts and episodes. We're just scratching the surface. I'm 3 years into learning this, and I learn every single day.
Yeah.
And I know you, Henk, were one of my first clients, and you've been around this for a few years. And I see you, just in our conversations, how you learn and you grow and you see things deeper. And so this isn't this is a state of mind piece, learn this and then off you go. There is something very, very profound and deep in this understanding. And it's almost like the more you learn, the more you get, which is different, maybe to some other approaches. But I've definitely found that true for me. I don't know if this is resonating.
It is. It's actually like we're both on the same boat with this, because we're like, this is so good. We're both spending our free time to make a podcast to tell others about it. And so my goal for today is that if some people resonate with the podcast so far, which is great, and I absolutely love that. But you said if people can get eyes for this, and I was wondering, what would they get eyes for? What are they? It's like a listener might be listening to this and wondering, like, okay, so this is cool. Deadlines can be easier. I can have more fun. I have more potential. But what is this guy seeing that I'm not? What is there that I'm?
It's a difficult question in some ways to answer, Henk, because we know what we know,
yeah,
and we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
So I'll just relate my story, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way or anything else that we know something and you don't. I don't want it to come across in that way at all.
Yeah.
Because I know a very, very small thing about one thing.
Yeah.
But my introduction to this was, I got introduced to this a few times. I read a book, and I attended listened to a talk. I had a conversation with someone, and I still had no clue what it was that these people were talking about. And then I did. I signed up to a program, and I did a course. And the first weekend with Garrett Kramer, I mean, Garrett said I was someone who got this very quickly, and it took me. I was on a 3-day course, and it took me to the second day till something popped in my head. And when it popped, and people had been saying that the whole time. But sometimes it takes a bit of time to get a feel for it, or an insight, an insightful understanding about how we are creating our reality.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's ultimately what we're talking about, that we are creating our reality, and not as a glib statement, we're creating our reality, but really seeing that on a deeper level. Because when we see behind that, when we see how that works, and what are the implications of that. I mean, that's a really important thing. When we see what the implications of that are, that's when things change. So, for example, with my client, okay, you know, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have misunderstanding. But when I knew and I saw that there is a solution to this, and that I am creating my reality of that situation through thought, my client was creating their reality of the situation through thought as well. That was kind of a common ground.
Yeah.
And so from that place, we communicated, and from that place, very, very quickly, a creative solution came out. It's a similar thing. I mean, I talk a lot about relationships. That's my other podcast is about. And even in relationships, it's kind of knowing that, and this can be true for a client relationship, it can be true for a relationship with your boss, but if we get stuck in the detail, we're kind of missing the fact that we are living in what we call separate realities. That you've got your reality, you're creating your reality through the power of thought, and whatever you're feeling is unique to you, and the other person is doing exactly the same. And so, it's why things aren't necessarily universally admired. You can get a piece of art or animation or anything, and someone might think, oh my God, that's amazing. And a lot of people can agree. So you can have things that more people think the Mona Lisa is a great piece of art than, I don't know, something that I drew yesterday. Right? Like you can have general trends, of course, but some people will look at a great piece of art, or what most people consider a great piece of art, and say, that doesn't speak to me, I don't experience anything. Because the truth is, we're all experiencing reality completely differently. Every single person that views the Mona Lisa, just as an example, will view it differently. Everyone that views, what you might consider a great piece of animation will view it differently. And even understanding that one fact is really, really powerful, because I know for me, a lot of conflict happened with me when I used to, and I didn't used to consciously say this, but I used to act in a way that there was one objective reality and everyone is viewing that exactly the same. Because if that is true, then when some people didn't look at things the way I did, they were stupid, they were ignorant, they were arrogant. That's what made sense. However, when I realized, oh no, they're living in their own reality, all of a sudden it made complete sense that they would have a different point of view to me. So when I come to life, to relationships with that understanding, it then becomes far easier to communicate with people, because I know that they're living in their reality. It's like if I speak to someone who doesn't speak English, if I assume they do speak English, I'm going to make lots of assumptions about them, why they're not communicating with me properly, why they're trying to be evasive or difficult. Whereas if I understand they don't speak English and I only speak English, I'm going to approach them in a completely different way and use different things to kind of communicate in a manner that we both understand, through maybe drawings or sign language or whatever makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. So in a way, you're describing examples where you think it works a certain way. You look at life and you think it's a certain way. You're absolutely sure because that's what it looks like. But then it almost feels like something taps you on the back and like pulls you apart and just pulls you back and just says, well, look at a bigger picture here. And then suddenly the thing you're thinking about becomes a little smaller almost. It's just a metaphor, of course, but it sounds like if you are your example of speaking to somebody and they look very stubborn and you stick with that, that's not going to be very helpful. But it only takes something to just back off of that and then wake up to that and then see the bigger picture and then realize, well, that might not be true for that person.
What we're really pointing to is, in effect, is really common sense, but just seeing that from a deeper level. So, I'd heard several times that, when you're in an impasse or when you're in a difficult, block, whether that's a creative block, whether that's a relationship block, whether that's any kind of place where you can't see clearly, take a step back from the situation, get a good night's rest, look at it again tomorrow. Now, why do people say that? Well, they say it because it's true and it works. And that also kind of ties into what we're talking about, because when we're kind of caught up, so typically when I'm in a creative block, I'm not having any thoughts which are helping me see past the situation. It looks like I'm kind of blocked into that, into a certain thing. There's no way out. Now, the truth is, more often than not, or pretty much every single time, I'm just not seeing the potential. I'm not seeing the possibility that is available to me. And trying to think about it more doesn't help, because you're adding, you're adding layer upon layer of thought, of unhelpful thinking, and that's when we can kind of go into a downward spiral. I don't know if you've ever had a relationship issue where you've texted someone and they've not texted back, and it could be anyone, and then you start creating a story why they're not texting you back. And it's like, oh, well, maybe they're busy. Oh, no, they're ignoring me on purpose. Or they're upset, or, whatever else. Or whether you've been waiting for exam results, and the longer you wait, you kind of make up a story about it. Yeah. And it's all fiction. We're just creating that ourselves. And so rather than putting layer upon layer upon layer of thought on, for me, it's really helpful just to take a step back, but not take a step back because it's a good idea, but take a step back because I realise, well, that's the way my mind works. My mind doesn't work by trying to think creative thoughts or trying to think a certain way, but actually letting that unfold, letting it come out. Now, sometimes letting it come out means doing nothing, and sometimes letting it come out might just be, for example, for writers, I don't know what to write. Well, just start writing anything. Just and letting it flow that way, but not trying to really think what would be a really clever thing to write, or what would be a really great thing to say here. Well, if that works, great. But if we get to that stage where we're blocked, thinking about it more is very counterproductive in my experience.
So the one thing that excites me about all of this, and it's kind of a delightful irony that it's so hard to point to, because it's the whole point. It is not something. It's we make something into a thing. We make a deadline into a thing. We make writer's block into a thing, and then we get really focused on it and really narrow on it. And feel free to correct me if you see this differently, but in a way, knowing that there is opportunity to have new thinking, to have new thought, or to come up with a new idea is usually surprisingly more effective. And not as a technique, but just being aware that if something is not working and you wake up to that, knowing that new thinking or a new idea will make it so much easier. And I'll speak for myself, is that whenever I'm stuck with something, I know that there's the potential for a new insight, a new idea, and that's the direction I look in. That knowing is what helps me move beyond block, because it's like, this is how I see it right now, but that's up for change, that's up for review, that it's not set in stone. It doesn't mean that it's going to be like that forever. And so to grab your example of sending an SMS and not getting a reply, and then getting really, really concerned with a fictitious story, the moment you realize that, you know what, that's made up, let's check in with that person, or let's wait a day, or whatever comes up in the moment is relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. And that one thing, I totally underestimated what understanding state of mind better would do for my life. Totally underestimated it. And it's funny how even just one insight that I've got from this has been profound. And one of the insights I had was literally just that. is when I'm blocked, when I'm upset, whatever, is just sleeping on it. And not sleeping on it like thinking about it, but doing the best that I could to sleep on it and letting my mind settle. Just kind of almost resetting. That one thing has saved me so much effort and heartache and misunderstanding and pain. You know, from when I was working in a corporate job and, you know, stuff would happen at work and I'd be really up in my head about it. And just being able to let go to whatever level I was able to let go and just go, right, I'm not going to think my way out of this. Let's just get a good night's sleep. Or even, well, I'm just going to go and not think about it right now and go and do something else. Like that alone has been, you know, just completely transformative. And it sounds so simple, and it is simple. And the truth is, sometimes when I speak to clients and I might suggest something, and they'll say, well, that's too simple. And I'll say, yeah, it is. And have you done it? And quite often, because things are so simple, we don't do them because they're too simple. We think it should be harder than that. If you've got a really, really strong writer's block, we want a complicated answer. If you've really kind of got a really tough situation at work, we want a really complicated answer. Or I know I did. And the truth is, it's far, far, far simpler than I ever thought before, than I ever knew. And that's just kind of one example of it. But there's just so many, and I get caught up in this too, and I forget, you know, what I teach from time to time. But what really helps me stay grounded is coming back to this, is going, okay, hold on a second. I know this. How does my mind actually work? What's really going on here? Rather than misinterpreting what I'm feeling. I've been talking a lot recently. I heard the phrase a long time ago about backwards rationalization, and I don't know if it's a kind of dodgy psychology, but I liked the term. And the way I interpret backwards rationalization is, as human beings, we like having answers to things. We like having answers to our behaviors, to why we've done certain things. And the truth is, most of our behaviors are automatic. We don't really think about them. We just act in a certain way. We can be playing out patterns from childhood or things that have happened in the past. And we don't think about them. But afterwards, we want to have an answer. And so we rationalize it. So I had a friend of mine who had agreed to do something, a work thing. And he had a choice. He works for himself. And he said, oh, should I go to this appointment? Should I go to this meeting? I don't want to go. Should I go? I don't want to go. And kind of, you know, there were a few of us sitting around a table, and he was kind of having this out loud. And he asked someone who was sitting there, and they go, yeah, I think you should go. And he said, oh, well, I'm not sure. He asked someone else at the table, and they go, well, it's up to you. And in the end he goes, oh, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go to this meeting. The funny thing for me was he then proceeded to rationalize his decision. Well, maybe I didn't go to the meeting because I don't really want to do this, whatever the meeting was about. And he goes, yeah, that's right, I don't want to do it. That's why I'm not doing it. And he convinced himself that his behaviour was telling him about reality. Well, I've not gone to this meeting because I don't want to have that meeting. I don't want to do this. That's not the way I want to go. And that's, it's a rationalization. He might have felt better because he had an answer, but it's not true. And sometimes we do this. I've seen other people do this where we try and rationalize something. We get an answer. We don't like the answer, so we'll wait for another answer. And our brain keeps giving us answers until we get the one that we like. And we're like, okay, that's right. The answer is, I'm just no good at animation. At
drawing, yeah, or whatever, or business, or, yeah.
Yeah, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so, okay, that's the perfect answer. I'm no good. We might not like the answer on one level, but it makes us feel like, oh, okay, at least I've got an answer. But the truth is, you know, we are looking at it backwards. We didn't think of that kind of going forward, and it's almost irrelevant, and it's not true more often than not, right? And so I remember someone telling me that another coach was telling me that they had a client who said, I can't get out of bed in the morning. And they were rationalizing it every single day. Well, it's because of this and this. And they were, maybe I just need more sleep than other people. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's that. They were coming up with answers. And he said, no, you're not getting out of bed in the morning because you're not getting out of bed in the morning. And as soon as your alarm gets off, if you had to jump out of bed as soon as your alarm went off, we'd fix this. And he's like, right, for the next 2 weeks, that's what I want you to do. And that's what they did, and guess what? They got over it. And there was no need for any rationalization. It's the same thing with motivation. A lot of people think they need motivation before they take action. I need to be motivated to write this story. I need to be motivated to do this piece of work. And the truth is, you only need motivation when you're not doing something. When you're doing, motivation is never a factor. It's irrelevant. You're just doing. And it's when we're not doing, then we think that we need this magical thing called motivation that we need to add to the list. It's not true.
Yeah.
And again, it's a product of us rationalizing, going, oh, that's why I'm not taking action. Well, we're not taking action because we're not taking action. Now, the cool thing for me learning about state of mind and understanding how the mind works better is I get caught out in backwards rationalization far less often. And the funny thing is, when we're doing all this rationalization, when we're doing all of this analysis, we're up in our heads. We're not productive. We're not in flow. We're not creative. And we kind of create our self-fulfilling prophecy. I think you talked about kind of cycles. And when we realize that we're doing that, that loses its power. That kind of cycle loses its power. We kind of drop back more into if there's not a flow state, just back into life, back into the present moment, and we end up doing more. And I know for me, a few years ago when I came across this, I'd really tried to be more productive at work, and what happened was I started learning about state of mind, and I became far, far more productive than using any of the techniques I'd done before. And the only thing that I now believe why that happened is because I was just spending less time in my head analysing things, or getting caught up in things, or getting upset about things, or getting frustrated about things. Because when I did, I saw them for what they were, which was just, that's how I feel in the moment.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then I just came back to living my life far quicker.
So it almost like, since we're talking about state of mind, like how your state is not telling you about anything out there, and not getting too caught up in that, it almost sounds like once you start seeing insightfully that the very moment that you feel or don't feel like something, that it's not really relevant. And to give a clear example, at some point I never did like doing my taxes. I was like, I don't like doing my taxes. Which sounds very reasonable, right? It sounds very, everybody says, yeah, I don't like doing taxes. But really, what are you not liking? It's like, is it the money? Is it, like, and so you make this, you just, like you just said, you rationalize it backwards. But in the end, if I would put it in my own words, I would say, you're connecting the feeling in the moment to something out there. Oh, I feel uncomfortable when I think about taxes, so it must be the taxes. I don't like the feeling, and so I don't like taxes. Well, that's nonsense. It's like,
yeah, I had a client of mine who was exactly the same around DIY. And DIY, so for maybe people that, I don't know if it's an English term, but doing stuff around the house, like putting up shelves, painting, that sort of stuff. And he'd had this story, in his head that, oh, I'm no good at it. Oh, I don't do that. And I went to visit him recently, and he's like, oh, I've painted this room, and I've done this, and I've done, and I was like, wow, you've done a lot. Were you always like this? And he said, no, I've never done this. I was of the mindset, I don't do DIY. And I said, what changed? And he's been a client of mine. And he said, well, I've been listening to what you've been saying. And I realized that the feeling of not wanting to do DIY had nothing to do with the fact that I don't do DIY or I do DIY.
Yeah.
It was just completely made up. And when he saw through that, he just started doing DIY, and he's painted a couple of rooms, and he's done a whole load of things, and he's like, there's a lot of stuff I didn't know and I've learned. And actually it's really funny because I'm very, very similar. My family don't do much DIY. I guess you learn a lot of this stuff from your parents, and I've just been picking it up now. And I've like, okay, well, what can I learn? What can I do? And I've done a bit of stuff, and it's been fun and interesting. And look, whether I do it or I don't do it, it's kind of irrelevant. But what's disappeared is the story I was telling myself that I don't do DIY. And there's so many stories I know I've told myself over the years that I do this or I don't do this. I'm this kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. And those kind of stories are just falling one by one. They're just disappearing and dropping. And again, that gives me a lot more choice of how I am in the world. And we're talking about creativity and being an artist. That's just one way, and I find myself being a lot more creative in the world. That's just one way that it's had an impact. But you know, there's many other benefits, and I know that, as with this guy, who was my client, a lot of people come to understanding the principles behind state of mind for one reason, and what's really nice is they get a load of bonuses. And the bonuses they often get are better relationships, and sometimes health benefits. Sometimes they look younger because they drop a lot of stress in their face. You know, all sorts of things tend to happen by understanding the principles behind state of mind better, as well as a thing that they wanted to get some benefit from.
It sounds, as you're describing it, like the equation of life becomes simpler. It's like any situation that you're in, you have a clearer understanding of how it works and how it doesn't work, and so you spend less time making fictitious stories that don't really matter. And as that happens, you have more potential for a new insight, almost, because you're not busy analyzing it or being caught up in feeling and making meaning out of it. You can actually see what's really going on instead of just being like, oh, this is terrible or this is amazing. Just really see the facts.
Yeah. I had a client of mine who was an engineer, and he was very stressed at work. And you know, as we spoke, you know, like exactly like you said, he saw what was really going on. And it was interesting because when you start to just peel away the layers a little bit, you know, we tell ourselves a story like, oh, I'm really stressed because of this work. Okay. Is everyone who's got that amount of work, do they have the same level of stress? Well, no, some people have more, some people have less. Okay. Isn't that interesting? Just, you know, as an example. And then also just to reflect on our own lives. Have you ever had this amount of work before and not been stressed? Or have you ever had less work and being stressed, or more stressed? And just kind of seeing through that story, seeing through that illusion that we have. And as my client did, and as many other people have done that, those stories have less power over us.
Yeah.
And what that does is give us a lot more power, a lot more choice, a lot more freedom to not be the victim of circumstance, not be the victim of deadlines and clients and projects, and instead live life in a lot more, I guess, in the flow, a lot more happier, a lot more fun. Because life should be fun.
Yeah.
I remember listening to, when I was in the early days in training, and listening to a teacher of these principles behind state of mind, and you know, she was talking a lot about fun, and I really resonated with that. And she goes, you know what? It's a general rule of thumb for her is, if life isn't fun, you're probably not doing it right. You know, there's probably something you're not seeing there. Now that doesn't mean it has to be fun all the time. You know, there are times to be serious and times to have fun. But in general, like, I took myself far too seriously before. Far, far, far too seriously. And made things serious that weren't.
So, part of me wants to summarize, part of me wants to tell another story, part of me wants to keep talking. So that's a good thing. There's a lot going on. I really enjoyed what you said about things can be fun and deadlines can be stressful or less stressful, and just looking in that direction just once you start looking in the direction of why doesn't this deadline stress that person as much? How is that possible? Just seeing that will open your eyes like a little bit more. You're like, really, this is not true for everybody. This is just happens to be my experience. And one other thing, and I think your coach talks about this. He just wrote some amazing books. And he really talks about creativity in everything he does. And it seems like he's really, really appreciating the fact that, you know what, without whatever circumstance comes up in your life, whatever you're dealing with, once you approach that with a creative and open state of mind, and you're curious about it and interested, you'll probably do a lot better than when you come in and you're like, well, this is bad, I don't like this at all. Because on the one hand, the this is bad and I don't like this at all is fictitious. It's not true for everybody in most cases. And I would even say in all cases, but if you see a glimpse of that, would be pretty cool. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, and it's almost so obvious that it's not worth mentioning, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't to people who are listening and watching. But if we're caught up in our heads, if we're in a bad mood, if we're in over analytical state, if we're in a low state of mind, whatever you want to call it, we're just not going to perform well or as well as we could do. We're not going to be as creative as we could be. We're going to approach life very, very, very differently than if we're open and we're in a good mood, we've had a good day. Things become so much more possible. And we all know that. We all know that. And what I'm pointing to, what you're pointing to, what other people on this podcast have been pointing to, is rather than stay at that level and get into, okay, so how can I be happier more of the time? If that was an offer, everyone would go, yeah, I'd like to be happier more of the time. I don't know anyone who wouldn't be. But rather than getting stuck in that level of emotion and behavior, is going deeper. So it's like the difference between looking at engineering versus physics. So rather than getting stuck in the level of engineering, like, okay, what can we do with this? How can I manipulate my brain and my thoughts and emotions, or think certain things, or meditate, or anything like that? It's about understanding how the system works. It's going deeper than that, because once you get a better understanding of how it works, so if you get a better understanding of physics, that's infinitely going to have a knock-on effect on how good an engineer you are. It's the same thing. If you have a better understanding of how the mind works, it's going to have an infinitely better or positive impact on your state of mind. Yeah. And the truth is, the majority of things that are out there that I used to think I knew about how the mind works simply aren't true. And again, you've had Garrett on here, and one of the things that Garrett said to me very early on was, one of the things that we know about, or is general knowledge about performing and performance, is visualization. Visualize yourself performing well, imagine yourself crossing the line or doing whatever. And yet if you talk to athletes who have performed very well and you ask them what was on their mind when they were performing well, they'll say nothing. Yeah. And the same is true, I would imagine, for creative people, that whilst you've got all these ideas coming along, you're not really thinking about it, or you're not setting yourself up. Certainly for me, when I've had great ideas, it's often when I'm just not doing anything, or when I'm in the shower, or when I used to be driving, or just before I was going to sleep. When I'm not thinking about whatever it is that I want a solution to, that's when my ideas come to me. So what we're talking about is very, very different to what is mainstream pop psychology, if you like. Yeah. So I just want to dig, if you're okay with that, a little bit deeper in the metaphor of physics versus engineering, or what did you say? Engineering versus physics. Yeah. So what came up as you're talking about that, I would call engineering the fact that you have a steam engine, or you have a
a diesel engine, you have an engine, and you know what technique to apply to fix it if it's broken. Right? You understand the nature of the engine. You understand that it needs a spark plug. If the spark doesn't plug, you fix the spark plug, and the engine works again. You're good to go. And that's useful. That's very useful. But somebody who it's like if you take somebody who is like a current mechanic who has a very deep understanding of physics, they know why not only the spark plug does what it does, but they understand. That's as far as I go with that understanding. But I'm really like there's something there.
Yeah, for me, I'm not going to use the locomotive example. I'm probably a little bit shaky on that metaphor, but for me, it really has been that. So when I used to learn a lot about the mind. I was really interested, like I said, for 10 years, and I knew certain things. I knew, certain things to talk to people in a certain way, and that were helpful and helped me and boosted my confidence to a certain level. But they were very much in the level of engineering. They were very much in what to do. So I learned a lot about kind of how to project my voice or how to speak well. I learned about how to present myself well. I learned about kind of, sitting up straight and all the rest of it. That's all in the realms of engineering. And when I learned more about how our mind works, which I guess is the physics, I was able to kind of almost step it up to the genius level in some ways, where I'd know what to do at what time, and sometimes doing things which were completely opposite against what I'd learnt before, but were perfect for that situation, perfect for that moment.
Yeah.
And I remember once speaking to someone who was, on the surface was in conflict with me, and understanding what I knew in the moment, I just said, as someone said something to you, I knew it wasn't about me, and they just popped out of it, and I remember afterwards thinking, God, how did I do that?
Yeah.
It was almost like so different, and I see this now with so many of the people that who have been on the journey that I've been on previously, that you can learn so much technique, and they're not bad, they're great, but if you don't have an understanding behind that around state of mind, if you don't understand how the mind works, those other things will only take you so far.
Yeah. And
I really strongly encourage people to get a better understanding around state of mind. I am completely biased, I know, but I really would encourage people to get that, because it will not only help you with whatever is coming up for you right now, it will help you forever, for the rest of your life. And also I found one of the great benefits of this is, and you and I were talking about artists and animators tending to do a lot of self-directed learning. Well, one of the great side effects for me about learning about state of mind better is it's helped me to be a better learner. And I don't think I was a bad learner before. I got a first-class degree at university, so I was doing something right. But I wish I'd known what I know now at university, because it would have been even easier. Not even easier. I didn't find it easy, but I would have found it far easier than I did to learn if I understood how the mind worked better. And I found over the last few years that I've been learning a lot about state of mind, but I've been learning other things I love learning, and other things I've taken on board a lot quicker. And if certain things, with everyone, we get certain things quickly, and certain things we take a bit longer to learn. And things that I took a little bit longer to learn, sometimes I could get frustrated, which lengthened the learning process. And understanding how the state of mind works, slows that down and stops that being such a long process.
Yeah, I completely relate to that, and the main reason why I'm currently talking to several artists about this, because I'm looking at my own work, and the deeper I see this, the faster I'm learning. And so I've just to give a concrete example, I've been having a very intimate journey with drawing for years and years and years, and On one level, I had a slight glimpse, just the fact that I'm angry doesn't mean anything about the drawing. The feeling is not connected to the drawing. And that helped me to just move on and just keep making pages. And that was pretty good. That was like a slight insight. But then the deeper that I'm seeing this, I'm now looking at the level of like, I make something, I can literally see there's something missing, I'm not seeing it. And so instead of digging deeper and making like 100 pages with the same thinking, I'm just going to put out the same result. So I back away and once you look at it, it's like it's obvious, something is missing. And I'll usually know what to do. And I find myself in a couple of weeks to just progress very, very easily, because whenever I make a mistake, I do it a couple of times, and then you see like, oh, I'm making the mistake over and over again. I have enough clarity in a way to see that. And once you have it, you see what you're doing wrong, you know what needs to be done. And so as I was running into that, I was like, holy shit, artists need to know this. This is going to help them so much. So in closing, I would recommend anybody who wants to know more of this to get in touch with either Ankush or me and have a conversation and see what's available. We're totally cool with providing some resources. We got like tons and tons and tons of in-depth knowledge about this. We're not going to be able to put this in one podcast. So, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I just really echo what you're saying, Henk. And I don't know if this is the right time to do it, but my website is ankushjain.co.uk, and if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can do that. ankushjain.co.uk. There's